Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is The Prowler, 1951. This film noir crime drama starred Van Heflin and Evelyn Keyes. The role for Keyes was said to be a divorce present from her ex-husband, director John Huston. This will be a great film to finish our Norvemberfest with. An uncredited New York Times movie review upon release said the film was surreptitious amour, a rich legacy and a murder has been pyramided into an impressive drama. IMDb.com rates this movie at 7.3, while Rotten Tomatoes has it at 100%. This movie was directed by Joseph Lucy. The screenplay was written by blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo and came out under his working alias, Hugo Butler. Hugo Butler was later blacklisted, even though he wasn't real. Interior designer for this film, John Hubley, was also blacklisted. I will talk about HUAC a little later, but first let's jump into our veteran actors. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Van Heflin was solid as Webb Garwood, a murdering policeman that was not above a little social climbing. Heflin was first covered as the bad guy in episode 98, They Came to Cordura, 1959. Evelyn Keyes played Susan Gilvery, the housewife looking for a little more. Keyes was covered in episode 38, 99 River Street, 1953. Herbert Anderson was in this film for just a bit and uncredited as a reporter. Anderson was covered in episode 50, Battleground, 1949. There were two couples that were supporting cast, and I find the two women by far the most interesting, so I will cover them. Catherine Warren played Grace Crocker, wife to cop Bud. Catherine was born in 1905 in Detroit, sometimes known as Detroit. Two notable films she was in are The Caine Mutiny, 1954, and All the King's Men, 1949. She died in 1965 at a very young age. Madge Blank played Martha Gilvery. Madge was born in Kansas in 1899. When World War II broke out, Madge went to work supporting the Manhattan Project and had a top-secret clearance. At the age of 50, she left government work and went to the Pasadena Playhouse to study acting. This was followed by a 20-year career, the highlights of which for me are Aunt Harriet Cooper, or Miss Cooper on Batman 1966-67, and as Larry Modello's mother on Leave It to Beaver 1958-60. Part of the reason she was on Batman was so the two males would be chaperoned. Madge had mostly small roles in television and film. She died in 1969. Dalton Trumbo was the uncredited radio voice of John Gilvery. He was paid $35 for this work, and he had to be uncredited because he was blacklisted. Trumbo was part of the Hollywood 10, the first group that was called before the Un-American House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, in 1947. The 10 refused to name names, standing on their Fifth Amendment rights. Trumbo was sentenced to a year in prison for contempt. Trumbo was one of the most successful and sought-after screenwriters in Hollywood. Although he was a member of the Communist Party, his writing was not overtly political. Trumbo wrote the anti-war book Johnny Got His Gun, 1939, but he had its printing stopped when the Nazis invaded the rest of Europe. Damn Nazis. Trumbo's screenwriting includes patriotic films like A Guy Named Joe, 1943, and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, 1944. His more left screenplays include Tender Comrade, 1943, starring Ginger Rogers. After prison, Trumbo lived in Mexico and continued to write screenplays for Hollywood under assumed names or for which other people took credit. Movies during the blacklist period include Film Noir, Gun Crazy, 1950, Roman Holiday, 1953, and The Court-Martial of Billy Mitchell, 1955, which was directed by Otto Preminger. In 1957, The Brave One, 1956, won the Best Original Story Oscar. It soon leaked out that Trumbo had written the work. When Pierre Boulez, who did not speak or write English, won the Oscar for The Bridge on the River Kwai 1957 screenplay, the fact that blacklisted people were writing had to be accepted. This allowed the great man, Kirk Douglas, to hire Trumbo to write the screenplay for Spartacus 1960 and insist that Trumbo's name was listed on the screen, and the less than great humanitarian Otto Preminger did the same thing for Exodus 1960, effectively breaking the blacklist. Post-blacklist screenplays include Lonely Are the Brave 1962, The Sandpiper 1965, Hawaii 1966, The Fixer 1968, and Papillon 1973. Trumbo had a small cameo in Papillon 1973. A heavy smoker, Trumbo died in 1976 of a heart attack. I know this is not a full Dalton Trumbo write-up, but I would be remiss if I didn't include a quote from his eulogy by fellow Hollywood 10 member Ring Lardner Jr. Quote, "At rare intervals, there appears among us a person whose virtues are so manifest to all, who has such a capacity for relating to every sort of human being, who so subordinates his own ego drive to the concern of others, who lives his whole life in such harmony with the surrounding community that he is revered and loved by everyone with whom he comes in contact. Such a man, Dalton Trumbo, was not." Unquote. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The movie begins with Susan Gilvery, Evelyn Keyes, walking around half naked in front of the bathroom window. She looks out and recoils in horror as she sees a prowler. The Los Angeles police respond to her call, sending veteran officer Bud Crocker, John Maxwell, and his less than happy rookie partner, Webb Garwood, Van Heflin. They make contact with Susan, and Webb checks the outside for footprints. Bud's advice is to keep the curtains closed, same as they keep the counting room out of sight in a bank.
You always alone at night?
Yes. The maid comes in daytimes, but she leaves right after dinner.
Well, from now on, be sure and pull the shades and lock the door.
I will.
Webb checks her out from the outside. Back at the cop car, Webb comments on what a dish Susan is. Bud invites Webb to his house to see the rocks that he and his wife Grace, Catherine Warren, have collected in the desert.
A hobby's a good thing, especially for the things you learn on
what
the
her
side.
angle is.
Huh?
Say, I wonder what her angle is.
Her? No angle. They're well healed.
Webb is already obsessed with Susan. Webb drops Bud off at the end of the shift. Instead of going off duty, Webb returns to Susan's house and says he is there to check and see if everything is okay. Webb makes himself at home and she goes to make coffee. He pilfers around looking at papers and pictures. Webb starts saying how good-looking she is and how he wouldn't leave her alone.
Actress, huh?
I tried to be. It didn't work out.
You're good-looking enough. What's the matter, didn't you have enough pull?
I was just a little short of talent.
I suppose you're married. Most of the good-looking girls I run into are.
Is this questionnaire in the line of duty?
Could be.
I am married. Happily married.
If I was happily married to a girl like you, I wouldn't leave you alone nights.
She is pretty uncomfortable. She is married to a wealthy night radio show operator. The radio voice of John Gilvery was Dalton Trumbo. Webb and Susan realize that they know each other from their hometown. Webb is a grief collector, complaining that he lost his scholarship because they were out to get him. He then goes into how poor they were growing up. Sometime later, Webb is back at the house in civilian clothes and Susan is making him dinner. Webb complains about being a policeman. Webb shamelessly flirts with Susan and she is pretty stiff. While getting cigarettes out of a locked cabinet, Webb looks over John Gilvery's last will and testament. He then starts to needle Susan about why she married John.
I married him because I wanted a family. That's why we got this big house. I wanted kids.
So have you got him?
No,
What other reason was there?
to stay away from men like you.
He tries to kiss her and she pushes him away and orders him out. Finally, she has to slap him. It turns into a triple. Webb leaves with a warning not to come back. Another night, Webb returns to Susan's house in his police uniform. He apologizes and she lets him in. He makes the play to be friends from home, alone in the big city. Webb badgers Susan into dancing. He starts kissing her and she says no, but they start kissing. Later, Webb is over at Bud and Grace's house looking at rocks after dinner. Bud tells Webb about a ghost town called Calico. Grace comes to Webb's rescue and lets him leave for his date. Grace really doesn't like Webb. The affair continues between Susan and Webb, and they spend a lot of time together. One night, Webb finds a gun on John's desk. Susan doesn't want to lose her rich husband in a nice house. Webb tells Susan that he is going to Las Vegas for a 2-week vacation. He says there's a motor court he wants to buy. He gets pissy when she can't go along. He tries to badger her and expects her to fly to Las Vegas the next night. In Las Vegas, Webb waits, but Susan doesn't come in on the flight. After his vacation, he starts stalking Susan's house, honking and shining his spotlight. He goes to see Susan, and John is also there. Susan and Webb go to his car. John has quit his job and suspects that Susan is having an affair. She wants out of the affair and also says the gun is missing. John comes out and hollers for Susan. Webb waits in the shadows with his gun. Back at his crappy one-room apartment, Webb gets a call from Susan and she wants to see him. He says it's too risky and he wants to quit as well.
Hello.
Webb, darling, I must see you.
I know, baby, I know, but it's too risky for you, way too risky.
I don't care. I must see you.
Yeah, but like you said, we better call it quits.
You don't mean that, Webb.
Yeah.
She keeps calling. Webb refuses to see her. Finally, Susan shows up at Webb's crash pad. Susan says she asked for a divorce and John refused. Webb tells her that it won't work because he could never give her the things she wants. When she leaves, Webb smiles because he has a plan. At the end of his shift, Webb drops Bud off. Webb heads to Susan's house and parks the patrol car across the street. He goes to the back of the house and cuts the screen door and makes noise with the gate. Webb gets the radio call from dispatch that there is a prowler at Susan's address. When he gets there, he makes more noise and John comes out with a gun. Webb yells halt and then shoots John. He then fires John's gun, hitting his own arm. Very similar to the beginning of Shield for Murder 1954. Susan comes out and starts hitting Webb. Webb calls for homicide. An inquest into the shooting is held and Webb gives his phony story. Susan calls him a murderer in the hearing. Susan has John's brother, William, Emerson Tracy, and his sister-in-law, Martha, Madge Blake, in court with her. Webb has testified that he has never seen Susan before, and Bud calls him out. Susan takes the stand and she is given the option to call Webb a murderer. She does not. Susan also lies that she does not know Bud or Webb, even though they had been at her house 2 months before when the Prowler was there. Susan says she believes the killing was an accident. The jury rules that it was an accidental homicide. Sometime later, Webb goes to a drugstore where William is working and says he is no longer working for the police force. Webb says he wants to make it right with Susan, but she won't see him. He tries to give money, and William was quite taken. William then goes into the fact that his brother was hard to get along with, and they couldn't have children, and the marriage was unhappy.
Sent her some flowers, but she sent them back. Guess it was the wrong thing to do, but I just can't seem to get this thing out of my head.
Oh, well, if I were you, I wouldn't...
Doesn't seem to be any way I can help at all. You know, with the house and everything, I guess she'll have enough to get by on. That is when it's all settled up, but in the meantime, if she needs any ready cash, it's not much, considering what's happened. It's only a little over $700, but if she'll accept
Mr.
it...
Garwood, that's just about the most decent thing I've ever heard a man say. And I'm going to tell her about it, too.
William agrees to intercede with Susan. Webb goes to see Susan with the blessing of William and Martha. He tries to embrace her, but she demands that he doesn't come near her. Webb sticks to his story that it was an accident, and she starts to crack.
I know how terrible it's been for you, Susan, but no matter how bad it was, you can't let an accident stand between...
Accident?
Accident, yes. Don't you believe that?
Well, I don't know what I believe.
When you lied for me on the stand when you said you'd never seen me before. You didn't think you were lying to save a murderer, did you?
Well, I don't know what I believe.
You believed I was guilty. You must have.
Oh, no, I wasn't sure. There were other reasons.
What other reasons?
He plays on the, "You really thought I was guilty?" He said he would never touch another gun, and he sets the hook. Sometime less than 4 months later, Susan and Webb get married. Bud and William are there supporting Webb and Susan. A reporter, Herbert Anderson, questions whether they should be married. Susan and Webb head to Las Vegas for their honeymoon. They stay in the motor court that Webb has now bought. He never had any money until now. They check into the owner's apartment. When Susan unpacks, she finds a gun in Webb's suitcase. When Webb gets back to the apartment, Susan drops a bomb on him. She is 4 months pregnant. Surprise! At first he is happy, and then realizes his plans will all fall apart. Since her dead husband John could not have kids, the ex-in-laws will know, and so will many of the people that followed the news of John's death. Susan wants to go away where they are not known. Rocket scientists Webb and Susan come up with a plan straight out of the Acme Coyote sales department. They will go away to a place where they are not known, and Webb will deliver the baby when the time comes.
Webb, we'll go somewhere where nobody's around, where we'll be absolutely alone. You would be my doctor, Webb.
No. Well, that'd be too dangerous for you.
Millions of women have babies without doctors. But you had training, haven't you?
Yes, but not enough. There might be complications. No, that's too risky. It's way too risky.
Well, if I'm not afraid, why should you be?
When Susan gets closer to her due date, they drive to the ghost town of Calico that Bud told him about. They set up a living area in one of the derelict structures. There is no real clear indication of time, but Susan is wearing maternity gear. They have a record player going and everything is fine right up until a recording of John's show plays. Susan freaks out when the recording says, "I'll be seeing you, Susan," as John signed off each show. A big sandstorm hits and life in the desert is not so good. Back in Vegas, Bud and Grace show up at the motor court. When Bud finds out that Webb and Susan are on vacation near Barstow, they head out to look for them. Kind of a needle in the haystack adventure.
Oh, Crocker's the name.
How do you do?
Well, this here's my war department.
Oh, of course. You're the people who send the wire.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this last one here's from Barstow. Says they're kind of stuck on that desert country. There's no need to expect them home for about 2 more weeks.
Barstow, huh? I bet Webb's going to take in one of my ghost towns. Used to pass the time telling him what I know about that country. Gold rush, land grabs. Mineral Canyon, you reckon?
Or Calico.
Oh, no. Mineral Canyon. Calico's the tail end of creation. Not even the coyotes will stop at Calico.
Susan is suffering as the birth draws nearer. Webb decides he is going to get a doctor. He takes out the gun he would never touch again. On the way, he smears mud on the tag of his shiny new green Cadillac. The doctor refuses to go with Webb until Webb shows his old LAPD badge. The doctor follows in his own car to Calico. The doc is pissed that he is taken so far out of the city. After the exam, the doctor says it will be about an hour until the baby comes. Susan is freaking out about being caught. She knows Webb is going to kill the doctor after the baby is born.
You were so frightened before. Now you're not. Why?
What is this, the 3rd degree?
Is it because of the gun? You said you'd never touch one again.
She is now sure that Webb murdered John. A baby girl is born in the morning, but Susan is in postpartum funk, compounded by the murder of her first husband and the impending murder of the doctor. Susan has warned the doctor to escape, and he does with the baby in tow.
What did you tell him?
To get away, if he could.
He took the key. Did you tell him our name?
I didn't have to. Your badge. You lied to him. He remembered seeing your face in the newspaper.
Why didn't he go last night?
He waited till he could take the baby with him.
Susan has hidden the key to their car. In the fight between Webb and Susan, he mentions the amount of money that John left for her, and Susan can no longer pretend Webb is not a killer. Webb gets the key from Susan and heads out after the doctor. In a narrow place on the road, he comes up against Bud and Grace. He demands they back up, and he starts ramming their car. Webb sees police coming up the road and drives back towards the town. Webb picks the largest slag heap to climb. Just before he gets to the top, the police shoot him in the back. Susan watches with satisfaction from the ghost town. World famous short summary. Rube Goldberg plan goes as expected. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Thank you for taking the time to listen. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at snarkymoviereviews.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All that I ask is you jump over to Apple Podcasts and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.